Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast. I'm really excited about my guest today. Today I have with me all the way from Ireland, Daniel Bourke, and this is his book here. It's called Déjà Rêvé Love at Second Sight and the Experience of Meeting in Dreams Before Meeting in Life. And I'll just say, honestly, I'm very interested in this topic because I've had a lot of deja vu experiences, and I've told you guys this in past podcasts where I felt like I've actually lived this exact life before, like where I've had weird deja vu experiences that I can't I can't place, So we're gonna find out what Déjà Rêvé is and how it ties in. And this is an amazing book. I'm just gonna read. I wrote today on the Typical Skeptic Podcast. We're diving deep in one of the most mysterious and intimate phenomena reported across cultures and centuries. Déjà Rêvé, the experience of already dreaming something long before it happens in waking life. My guest today, Daniel Bourke, joins me to discuss his brand new book, Déjà Rêvé and Love at Second Sight, a groundbreaking exploration into dream encounters, prophetic romance, and the hidden layers of our dream world shapes destiny. The book documents hundreds of real cases, legendary, historical, and modern, where people dreamed of a lover, a meeting, or a turning point before it manifested in the physical world. We'll unpack precognitive romantic dreams and soul recognition, dream encounters that led to real-world relationships, cultural dream rites, spells, charms, and moon practices, saints, shamans, mystics, historical figures guided by dream visions, what déjà vu dreams feel more vivid, symbolic, and directive, and what this phenomenon reveals about fate, consciousness, and the unseen world. If you've ever dreamed of someone before meeting them or felt an uncanny pull towards a person or moment, this show is for you. And a little bit more about my guest. Daniel Bourke is an author, poet, songwriter, and researcher whose work explores the intersection of dreams, consciousness, and extraordinary human experience. He's the author of Telepathic Tales and Apparitions at the Moment of Death, and his writing has appeared in numerous respected magazines. With a background spanning natural sciences, the arts, and the video game industry, Daniel brings a multidisciplinary lens to topics often overlooked by the mainstream media. And this book is one of the most comprehensive collections ever assembled on prophetic dreams, precognitive romance, and the mysterious phenomenon of already dreamed experiences. And with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome back to the show for the first time. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Not too bad, Rob. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the introduction.
Yeah. I'm excited about this. So tell us a little bit about this. What got you into this topic?
Well, when I was researching for the book you mentioned previously, the Telepathic Tales, that was a book dealing with just general kind of telepathic experiences across cultures and time, where I wanted to really show how common these experiences have been throughout the course of history. And it was while I was researching for that book that I started to realize how common these kinds of experiences were, these experiences of déjà rêvé. And that's how I came to these experiences. And for the listeners, I will say that déjà rêvé is distinct from the more commonly known déjà vu. Déjà vu is the sense of something already seen. It's the sense that one has experienced this moment before or been here before, etc., etc. However, it is not tied specifically to knowledge of why that is the case. But with déjà rêvé, already dreamed, as the French call it, this is the experience in which the moment itself is tied directly back to an original dream, that is at times has been actually recorded on paper, for example, or in some sense told to somebody else ahead of time, and often includes many different examples of veridical information, such as like the person's hair color, maybe the jacket that they would be wearing when you met them, etc., etc. So that's the key distinction between the two, and the phenomenon that I'm interested in this book.
Yeah, I love it. I've actually had a case of this before. I've actually had a dream. I was going to meet a woman, and then I actually met that woman, and I traced it back to my dream, and I was like, holy shit, I can't believe this actually happened, And then I just I'm telling you, I get weird experiences of deja vu, and I guess I've had this déjà rêvé multiple times, but it makes me think that maybe there's something more to this world than we can even imagine as far as past lives go, and the people that we interact with in this world, and if we're connecting with them from another world as well, concurrent realms. parallel realities and then past lives as well. So like, like if there are multiple dimensions, maybe we're meeting people in concurrent lives or parallel lives as well as past lives. What do you think about that?
First of all, it's fascinating that you've had that experience yourself. And you tied it back directly to a dream. That's so interesting. And that's one thing that took me by surprise when I was researching for this book, was how many people actually claim to have had this kind of experience. It seems to be relatively common. And, one of the explanations that one of the senses people come to upon having had these experiences is exactly what you just said. It's the sense that, well, me and this individual that I dreamed of ahead of time were fated to meet in some way before not necessarily just before the meeting, but maybe before our lives even began. Perhaps, you brought in reincarnation, for example. There are some connections I kind of like to make sometimes, which are like, for instance, during near-death experiences, people often claim that when they were dead and they were visiting deceased relatives, they speak to people in that realm, in that other world, while clinically dead, that claim that they will meet later in their real lives. Or it may be a house or a place that they will go to, for example, or children that they may have. And the claim then, many years later, after the near-death experience, they claim, yes, I did meet this person from that other world, from the time in which I was dead, for example. So that is one way that people do tend to explain these experiences, is that these are souls. These are perhaps some sort of, as they call it, a soul family, some sort of connection between people that exists before the meeting, and the meeting is just a fulfillment of that initial promise in some way.
And when I know you've written books called written Apparitions at the Moment of Death and Telepathic Tales, and now Déjà Rêvé. So obviously you have an interest in consciousness, but like, take us through like your life. Like, have you ever had experiences that kind of shaped the way you perceive some of these things, or got you interested in some of these things, or is it just an interest in consciousness that you have?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, but mostly just the general interest, because me personally, I have not had many of these experiences. However, I have had some, and there have been some in my family. And like, for instance, there have been numerous examples of what you just mentioned in my family, the crisis apparition, as we mentioned, these experiences of where you interact with or visualize or in some way see the form of the loved one, of somebody who you love, who happens to be dying at that moment somewhere else. But you didn't necessarily know this at the time. Okay, you discover later that, oh, my grandmother who walked through the door and spoke to me and said goodbye, or just waved, for example. It turns out they died at that very moment. This is the classic crisis apparition. And in my family, yes, I have had multiple experiences of this kind. For example, my grandmother, when her daughter sadly passed away, the moment that she had died in a car crash, my grandmother's dead brother walked slowly into her bedroom as she was lying down, turned and looked at my grandmother, simply tipped his hat to her and said her name, followed by, "It's Holly." Okay, now that means that's the name of her daughter. He said, "Mary, it's Holly." And the phone call came just minutes later that her daughter Holly had been in a car crash. And that is one experience of a number that have been throughout my family. But as it relates to Déjà Rêvé, I have personally not had this kind of experience myself, no.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't want to go too off the beaten path, but like, I think you'll find this interesting, is like,
Yeah.
I have a little bit of Irish in me, like, I'm mostly Mediterranean, but like, so my grandmother had an Irish last name, and like, from what I know, it seems like the Irish, culture is very supernatural. It's very, it's filled with like leprechauns, fairies, if you look into some of the Celtic folklore, it seems like they were being taken by the fairies. Fascinating culture for the supernatural. Like, I really truly believe that. Would I be right by saying that?
Absolutely. Like in fact, in some of the most ancient texts of our country, and Ireland has some of the most ancient texts in Europe, and in some of those, this kind of experience is explicitly understood to exist, this kind of déjà rêvé. And like, for instance, there was ritual among the Druids called the Tar of Esh. This was a ritual in which the next king of Ireland was to be located specifically by making use of a dream of this kind. So, in other words, they understood that these types of things occur to the extent that they would actually actively make use of them. So, the individual would be put into a type of sleep, what's called a bull sleep. This is the Tar of Esh again. And that individual was to discover in that dream somebody in Ireland who was later to be the king of Ireland. Okay, so this is a kind of experience you'll read about in ancient Chinese texts, ancient Japanese texts, for example, where emperors are chosen in this manner, or where emperors dream of, you know, strangers incumbent into their lands, for example. Again, coming back to Ireland, there are examples in the texts of, kings who, while they're sleeping, they dream, they visualize the boats that are incoming, the enemy. They visualize, the enemy crossing the Irish Sea, for example, and then later this comes to pass. You find the same in Native American tales. You'll find that somebody from a strange tribe, maybe, for example, they're coming into the village up a river. They're dreamed of ahead of time. They're recognized ahead of time. These things are understood as possible occurrences, and they're taken very seriously, unlike kind of amongst our own Western contemporaries.
Yeah, and then this book, and I have a copy of it, guys. The people from Inner Traditions were very nice enough to send it to me. Shout out to Gail and Manzanita; they're my representatives over there, and those ladies are amazing. But no, this is an amazing book, Daniel. And it seems like you've compiled a lot of like everything from like historical cases to like folklore to like spells and enchantments that people use to document or talk about meeting their future partner or soulmate years before they met them physically. I love it. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I have this kind of addiction to, like for me, if I become interested in a phenomenon, it's not enough to read 2 accounts, 5 accounts, 10 accounts. I need to read hundreds of these accounts, and I need to get a real sense of the deeper details of these accounts and how many people are experiencing them. What are the similarities? Do they have similar after effects and meanings to these people, etc., etc. And like for the listener, I could mention one of the more famous examples of deja vu it's often recounted as being experienced by a romantic poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Okay, this is a very famous example of so-called deja vu. However, if you read it a bit closer, it is actually a déjà rêvé, because Shelley dreamed the moment ahead of time, and this is specified. So he called this one of the most remarkable events of his life. And it occurred while he was studying at Oxford. And while he was walking with his friend, he turned a corner and recognized every single detail of the scene in front of him, as if the moment had occurred in exactly this way before, right down to the layout of the brickwork on the ground. And he said, quote unquote, "The effect which it produced on me was not such that it could have been expected. I suddenly remembered to have seen this exact scene in some dream of long ago." So this is not a déjà vu as it is often said to be. It is a déjà rêvé, and it's interesting in that way, because with déjà rêvé, it's not just that the individual remembers this moment from a dream. They often remember it so much so that they can predict what will happen next. They will say, for example, when I turn this corner, there will be a particular type of building or brickwork or person or place or thing, etc. So for the individuals involved, these can be, as you mentioned for yourself, these can make them question the very nature of the consciousness, the universe itself. What does this mean that I had this experience? Now, the mainstream will commonly put these experiences to errors in memory, glitches in memory, for example, some sort of misconstruing of facts. Certainly these things are possible, but in this book what I want to do is lay out in detail what the largest amount of these accounts that has ever been laid out, and alongside what these accounts mean to those people.
Yeah. Well, you've collected hundreds of dreams where people met their future partner or soulmate years before they met them physically. Let me ask you this: what themes or patterns kind of show up mostly consistently, and like, or were there like patterns? Would you say?
I would say that for me, the main pattern in these is the initial two things: the actual veridicality. Now, veridical is the Greek for truth telling. These are the kinds of experiences that I'm interested in my work. These are experiences, these are visions and dreams in which the inner world of the individual correlates directly with the outer world. In other words, like we mentioned with the Christ apparition, I had this visual experience. It turns out it actually correlated with something that really occurred. For example, with Déjà Rêvé, the same is true. It's that initial shocking moment of, oh, I can't believe it. This ties directly with my dream. Okay. And then it's the after effects. It's the I met my wife of 50 years in this way. I met my guru in this way. I met a doctor or a healer in this way. This is something that comes out both in the tales and in our own times. Like, for example, if you'll allow me, for the sake of the listener, there's an account, and I will say I found many of these accounts just in biographies, just tucked away in the corners of people's kind of, whether it's anthropological journals, whether it's the lives of the saints. They're a lot of the time they're mentioned in passing. Very little is said on them. And in one account, there was a guy called T.J. Carney. Okay, this is a 107-year-old man from Arkansas at the time, and his daughter related in his biography an incident from his life that occurred in 1936, and he had a dream which, at the time of recalling, he considered to be "quote unquote" as clear as if it happened today. And he was driving Pine Bluff Station, and he got out of the car and headed to the terminal, the station terminal. He saw a girl standing there as if waiting for him. And he said, "I swear in all my years of traveling, I hadn't seen a girl as pretty as this one." Okay. He describes her hair in detail. He describes her eyes. And he said it was something he could never forget. And he said, the woman said to him in the dream, "You come to carry me home, James. I'm your wife." She repeated this multiple times while moving away from him, waiting for him to catch up. Later, this is out of the dream now. Later, at his friend's New Year's Eve party, Carney speaks to his friend Gracie, who has another friend with her. At a glance, he feels he knows her face. Soon, she is formally introduced to Carney as Ethel Virginia, Grace's cousin, and he says, "I was sure this was the shy smile from that I'd seen somewhere before, and when our hands touched, it was like electric currents went through me." And you'll excuse me that this is quite a bit longer than I remembered, but the basic summary is that he actually even goes to look for specific details to confirm that this was the case. Like he remembered in the dream she had a green jacket, for example, and he goes looking to see if she had a green jacket, and he didn't find it. But when they got together, as they did, they ended up marrying. He later found that she had the very same. She did actually own the same jacket from the dream at the time, even though it didn't turn up when they first met. So this is like a interesting kind of sub detail that turns up in these accounts, whether it's the hair, whether it's the way the beard is cut, etc., etc. Little extra confirming details that tell the individual, this was something that I consider to have been a real kind of sign of the future, for example.
Yeah, me and a woman I'm interested in, like I guess you could say we're kind of dating, but like we live far away from each other, because like. But what I want to tell you is, she had a dream. She told me she had a dream that we were like laying in bed, and there was this 4-year-old girl there, and it was our daughter, And then I had a dream recently that I was playing with this 4-year-old kid, and the way I described this girl and the way the woman I'm interested in described this girl, it seemed the same, right? And in my dream, the woman says to me that I'm interested in, she says, "She's yours." And when she says she's yours, I get scared and I wake up and I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, what are the chances that she had the dream about it? And I don't have any kids in this life. I don't have any kids, and I'm 46 years old. So like, if I were to have some kids, it would probably be, I mean, I'm a little bit late for that now, I would say, but I mean, anything could happen. I'm saying, but I mean,
absolutely these days.
What do you think that is? Do you think that could be a Déjà Rêvé in the making? Like,
I mean, truth be told, I mean, yeah, it absolutely could. I mean, it's not for me to tell you that it couldn't, obviously, first of all. It's very possible that we get these flashes, and sometimes me personally, I'm not necessarily sure in each case, is it actually a flash of the future, or is it actually just some sort of like mysterious telepathic communication between the two individuals who just then happen to meet in the future? It could be all of the above, etc. But like in your case, like as I mentioned, there actually have been many cases like you just experienced. Like I don't believe this one is in the book, but there are numerous examples of people who have visions of their children ahead of time, or near death, or for example, visions of they have a near death experience and they actually are presented with a child It may be a baby, or it may be somebody who's 3, 4, maybe somebody who's a little older, for example. And they claim then that later in life, when they had their child, this was the same child visually, the same exact person, and that they were offered a glimpse ahead of time for whatever reason. And so, in your case, I guess it is possible that in the future, either A, you will meet this person, or B, you won't necessarily, but it was possible that this was what they would look like, for example. Who knows?
Well, I just said, I was going to say, what if, I'm sorry, Daniel, I just wanted to say,
Okay.
what if that's a concurrent life? Like, what if that's a life in a parallel lifetime? Like it's happening concurrently. Do you believe in that could be a possibility?
I mean, I don't, I do think it's a possibility. I don't actually, I haven't factored that in much, I must say, in the book. I haven't thought about it much, but it is, I guess it is possible, especially in this kind of day and age of, you know, multiple dimensions, different types of theories relating to time, headlines about light traveling back in time, etc. I've seen many things like this recently, and I mean, a concurrent life, I guess it's possible. I can't speak much to it, but I guess it's possible. What do you
Yeah.
think? Do you think that's possible?
I do. I think the dream world or the astral world is like another dimension. I feel like it's another dimension that we go to and that we live out these things. I didn't think that at first because I think it can be multiple things. I think people can have like precognitive dreams. They can have deja vu dreams, déjà rêvé, but I feel like it's all tied together to past lives, concurrent lives, parallel lives that we're living. And maybe the soul is like multifaceted. Maybe the soul can exist in different places at different times, and and we're only experiencing this 3D reality because for whatever reason we're grounded to this reality, but maybe the soul can experience different things in different places. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking
No.
yeah.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, I even though I don't know much about can't speak much to the concurrent aspect. Like, I do think that there is a huge amount of evidence for what you're speaking to. There, like, many of the cultures that I kind of look at in my books, believe exactly this. They believe that the soul wanders, even not only with you consciously aware of it, but of its own accord also. Like, for example, I often bring up the example of the Indonesian group, the Torajans. When it comes to something like Déjà Rêvé, for example, when we encounter it, we consider it uncanny, we consider it mysterious, we consider it a kind of a shocking break from normalcy, from normal reality. But in these other cultures, that's not necessarily the case. They have cosmologies that very easily account for these experiences. For example, the Torajans believe that the soul visits places while you sleep, not only that you've been before, visits people also, but also places and people to which you have never encountered before. So for them, when they have this experience that we're speaking of here, déjà rêvé, when they see a place they believe they dreamed of before, they see a person they believe they've dreamed of before, they account for it very easily and say, yes, this was because my soul has actually clairvoyantly attained this information in some way, or it's traveled the world itself at night and attained the information in this way. And yeah, that's a very interesting contrast between the cultures that experience these same phenomena.
Yeah. Did you ever think that? From your findings support the idea that dreams are kind of like a shared space where two consciousness can meet before physical lifelines cross?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, let me be clear, like with this book, I'm not saying, I don't want to say this is all the strongest possible evidence of that being true. But what I'm saying is, like, there is a huge amount of evidence. There is a huge amount of data within which people suggest this is true, A, and B, they come to believe exactly what you've just said, that there are these overarching connections. I mean, how can you not believe that? I'm sorry, I should say it like this, like, it shouldn't be surprising at all with something as important as love, for example, that people would come to believe this. I mean, I've often thought about it myself. I mean, if I actually did visualize somebody ahead of time before meeting them. Like it would kind of definitely blow my mind. I mean, what an extraordinary experience to have if it is what it presents as. So you can understand why people would come to the conclusions that you're mentioning, these overarching connections between souls, consciousness. It speaks to the possibility that there are these greater connections between us. And there is even a more there's a deeper kind of meaning to life. Maybe we're all a little bit more connected than we thought we were in this way.
Yeah. Have you encountered cases where both people dreamed of each other before meeting, like a two-way precognitive event?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, if you look back, and I have many accounts of the older accounts in this book also, like, for example, Greek romances, or excuse me, dream visions from the Middle Ages, for example. What you just mentioned is a very typical type of dream vision in the Middle Ages, especially in France, for example, these so-called amours de l'âme. These were dreams in which for example, we've all heard of the dream in which the knight visualizes the distant maiden in a dream. She's in a tower, for example, trapped. He goes specifically to find her and locates her, and we read this and we think it's just a story, it's just a fun tale, there's nothing to it, okay? Or we could look at the ancient Welsh Mabinogion. This is one of their most ancient texts, and in there, a guy called Maxen, an emperor, he dreams of a blonde maiden, and she completely takes over his mind after this dream. He can't stop thinking about her. He stops eating. He stops drinking. He stops caring about anything. Eventually, he sets his armies to motion across the world, across the lands, through forests, through trials, etc., etc., and eventually comes to the exact place and the land where this woman was, and found this woman. Okay, and again, we read this and we think it's just a dream, it's just a vision. Again, though, people still claim to have the exact same experiences, and not only that, but similar effects. So just like Maxon, not only do these people dream of others ahead of time, but they claim then that they also dreamt of each other. And there are multiple accounts in the book in which, in fact, there is one account in the book in which, after it takes many years for the wife. Okay, so I'm not being too clear. There's an account in the book when a guy dreams of his future wife ahead of time. Okay, they eventually do meet. He confirms, yes, this is the woman. I'm shocked. It's amazing. However, many years later, she confesses to him that she also dreamed of him before they'd met, and she was afraid to tell him, for fear of seeming a bit strange or odd, etc., etc. And this is a recurring theme. People have these experiences, but they don't want to speak about them because, of course, they're going to be considered kind of pathological or somewhat unhinged, etc. And yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, it is the case that it's not just one-way traffic. It does go both ways at times, and there are many examples in the book.
Well, that's amazing. And then I kind of wanted to get into like folk magic cultures and moon charms. You mentioned dream charms, moon rituals, herbs under pillows, mirror gazing, practices going back centuries. What cultural methods did you find the most unique or interesting?
Well, first, let me say that the most interesting thing I find about this is that, like, if you look at, early modern Europe, whether it's England, whether it's the countrysides in England, you could go to even Serbia, whether it's, Russia, and you can even go further, as I do in the book, to places like Pakistan or even China. You find that there are these established ritual types in which people actually attempt to dream of their future lover. They actually attempt to visualize them ahead of time. Okay, so obviously that implies that these people think it's possible. And, it's my contention, I contend in the book that, excuse me, this could be the case due to, people around them having had these types of experiences for real before. That's just kind of a side note that I find interesting. But, like, for example, you mentioned the moon, etc. There are so many examples of poetry, charms, and divinations, and short deities, etc., that are used alongside a ritual. And these are often relatively complex rituals. Like, for example, in Nebraska, there's a new moon charm in which one needs to look over the right shoulder and recite a short rhyme which goes, "New moon, true moon, pray let me see who my husband is to be, the color of his hair, the clothes he is to wear, the happy day he weds me." Okay, and again, we can look at this and kind of chuckle, and that's what a lot of people did, actually. A lot of historians looked at these kinds of examples and they kind of turned their nose up and say, these are superstitions from the countryside, there's nothing to them. However, even within this little poem that I recited, the color of his hair, the clothes he is to wear, we've just seen an example of that. I mentioned it 10 minutes ago, where a man did claim to see the clothes that this woman wore, the green jacket ahead of time, or a woman who did claim to know what the details of the man's hair was. So I suggest that it may be the case that these people are not necessarily wishing upon a dream or, speaking into the void, that they're speaking to something they consider to be actually possible. And not only that, but that actually does occur and therefore may actually be possible.
No. And then many ancient traditions believe dreams were direct communications from guides or ancestors. Do you see the similarities between prophetic love dreams and shamanic dream practices? Would you say?
Well, yeah, like there's the direct connection there is that they both, have this same experience. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is that we're having today, like even like you yourself told me you had an experience of this kind. I'm sure many of your listeners either have had an experience of this kind or have told others. And the connection between ourselves and whether it's these shamanic cultures or whether it's these kind of renowned saints and scholars, for example, etc., the connection is that we're all still having these experiences, and we should kind of speak about them for that reason and not just assume that they're purely literary devices, purely kind of stories told for particular reasons. They are often that, but they're most certainly not only that. And there are many examples. And you mentioned kind of this God and this fated aspect of it. And there's I have a chapter in the book which really goes into, people who believe they think that because of this experience, God exists, or because of this experience, the universe has guided me. These experiences bring people to these beliefs in the first place. Like, we could look at so many examples in the book. For example, a girl called Jenny Swindle in 1999 dreamed of a kind man with short, dark brown hair smiling at her. She said it felt, quote unquote, totally real, which is interesting in and of itself, that she's distinguishing this dream from others ahead of time. And she said when she met her future husband Kevin, he matched exactly the dream, and she concluded based on this that the Lord had revealed her future husband to her. So my connection there with the folk practices is that even today people are concluding that these things work, and a being revealed it to me. So therefore, it's not surprising to me that people would implement these rituals and practices in appeal to a universe that within which these things are possible.
Yeah. And what would you say one of the most astonishing prophetic love dreams you came across? Like, which one that really stuck out to you? Would you say?
That's it's funny. That's one of my most feared questions because there are so many in the book. But the one I mentioned with T.J. Carney and the green jacket is one of my favorites. However, there is another one that I find interesting, and I have a chapter in the book called Picture Perfect, and this is a chapter in which the individual dreams ahead of time, but they don't meet the person that they dream of. Okay, they dream of them, and then they later encounter them in a picture or in an artwork or in a painting, for example, or even in a statue. There's an ancient account in the book in which a Greek man dreams of a woman ahead of time, and later visualizes a statue which was exactly the one from the dream. But to come directly back to your question, there was one interesting account in the book that I just found in this random kind of biography dealing with a girl who lived in a Russian village, and her name was Yelena Razduyeva. And when she was 18, she dreamed of being at a river near her little village. And when a handsome and tall young man appeared, took her by the hand and told her, quote unquote, "You will be my bride before God." And then Razduyeva wakes up with this strong feeling to remember that dream and this man. And again, I will say that I find it interesting that a lot of the time these dreams are noted as being special in relation to other dreams even before their fulfillment. But that's just a side note, because Razduyeva then, she was, in the meantime, another man was courting her, but this didn't last long. Okay, and then she said, even after all those years, the dream had stayed with her, even after 2 different marriages. And there was a custom of the time in her village. where young women would write letters to prisoners. And when one came back to her in reply, something about the handwriting struck her. She said she felt connected even to that and sent another letter in reply asking for a photograph. "Quote unquote, I want to see your face," she wrote. And when she said when it arrived, she looked at it and said, "He really was the man from my dream, my true love. I'd waited almost 20 years. I can't explain any of this to anyone. It's like a fairy tale." And she even told her husband at the time of this dream, and that this was actually her true love. So what you're seeing is, the most obscure people in the most obscure places, and that's not to belittle the individuals, to say that we haven't heard of them, have these dreams and experiences, and they've shaped the very course of their lives. Like, there are examples in the book of people moving house, moving their entire lives to a different area based upon one of these dreams.
Wow.
Moving, yeah, it's incredible. Like a woman in Hawaii, a woman who dreamed she should move to Hawaii, left based specifically on the advice of this dream, and met the woman who told her to do that where she moved to. So I thought that was fascinating, that these dreams still have these they impel people to action even today in the world.
Yeah, and you have a background in natural sciences. Is there any scientific model that could explain the precognitive dreams at all? Do you feel?
Well, first I will say, that's not my area of expertise. Is not necessarily that. It is collecting these accounts and putting them before the reader. However, there are, like, these kinds of experiences of déjà rêvé, when they have been studied, but not much. Okay, there have been studies throughout the 2000s, for example, in which people, they used virtual reality headsets to kind of show that people could have a sense of having been in a place ahead of time, but they never actually were there. It's this false sense. Okay, so there's a term called paramnesia. This is a false memory. This was kind of coined in the 20th century, and then by a guy called Cray Palin, a German guy. And the thing is, a lot of these accounts, when they occur, people consider them from the outset to be false memories. Okay, because the terminology is actually that. Okay, but in terms of the actual accounting for them scientifically, there has been very little work done. I think there have only been a couple of papers actually ever written specifically on déjà rêvé. Now, to be clear, the explanation is usually that it's a false memory. Okay, it's a misremembered thing. It's a glitch in your memory. It's an error in perception, for example. Okay, now, in the early days, a lot of people who did have temporal lobe disorders, for example, or types of delirium, or different types of cognitive deficiencies, they did experience these déjà rêves. They did claim that, "Oh, I met you before, I've been here before," and it was tied directly to the issues with their brain. And to be clear, those are real phenomena. The problem is that so many people, so many ordinary people without these issues, experience the very same. And again, in many cases, and this is one of the key facts too, the individuals recorded these dreams ahead of time, ahead of their fulfillment, okay, which discounts the possibility of the error in memory and perception. So we cannot apply that typical scientific example to all cases. That's something that I find very important. And if I can note a couple of these cases, if you'll allow me. For example, English anthropologist Henry Savage Landor, he recorded a dream in his journal in 1844. His father dreamed he was sitting weaving at his loom when a knock came at the door. A tall, fair, blue-eyed man, apparently of noble bearing, entered. This stranger proceeded to instruct his father through the night, still in the dream, until the quote-unquote plan of salvation was made clear to him. The man then left, and Henry awoke. His father, pondering the identity of this man, was sure no elder knew. Later, another elder brought a portrait of the prophet Joseph Smith, and according to Henry Savage, this anthropologist, quote unquote, my father instantly recognized the face as the man of his dream. And again, the reason that's interesting is because he recorded it in his journal before the fulfillment of the dream. So that speaks to why we cannot generalize in either direction as to the meaning or nature of these accounts.
Wow, this is fascinating. And then does your research suggest that a certain relationships are a part of a fated path or a pre-written soul contract?
Yeah, again, I would say that wasn't like a key conclusion from it, but it is absolutely something that you can take from it. And again, it's something that is kind of, it becomes unavoidable to consider, because the individuals themselves are often saying this. They're saying that, you know, because, they're saying that, this, it's, for example, there's a woman called Mabel Dodge Luhan. She was an arts patroness. Okay, she dreamed repeatedly of her future husband's face, called Tony Luhan. And before they met, he had seen her, as it turned out. This goes back to your previous question. He later confessed to have seen her in a vision too, including specific details such as her hair coils and the way in which her hair was braided, for example. And based upon this dream, to speak directly to your question, Luhan concluded that they were, quote unquote, fated to be married. So she obviously came to the conclusion that, based upon the fact they dreamed of each other, there was something in the background at work. There was some sort of fate at play here, something beyond kind of the normal machinations of coincidence. So yeah, absolutely, that is something that turns up and is a possibility.
Wow. And then, are there, would you say, like, are there a lot of modern people reporting more of these dreams that now, or would you say it's more in history?
That's a really interesting question. I would say, yeah, that's such an interesting question. I would say that it's probably the case that a similar amount of people have these experiences throughout all times. But I do think it's probably the case that there are more of these experiences recorded now, although they aren't actually really compiled or spoken about. In other words, like, for example, I do think it's possible that this is one of the first collections of these kinds of experiences across such a vast kind of time span and culture in my book. And I didn't go into, like, I didn't actually try to find such specific details regarding prevalence, but one thing is clear: they are very prevalent among people today. And are they more prevalent than the past? I'm not entirely sure. I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. It's a very interesting question, but it seems to be the case that in both, whether you're looking at early modern England, whether you're looking at our own times, whether you're looking at ancient Japan, certainly these things did occur to varying degrees, and they will continue to occur to varying degrees.
Yeah, and we kind of talked this, but to close out on the Déjà Rêvé, like, if Déjà Rêvé is real and widespread, what do you think it tells us about the nature of time?
Well, I will say that if the accounts are what they suggest themselves to be, you know, it tells us that, I'm not sure what it tells us about time, but it does tell us about consciousness. It tells us that we can know things ahead of time. We can meet people ahead of time. There is a connection between ourselves and the cosmos that we were unaware of. There are channels of information open to us that we weren't necessarily commonly aware of, for example. It speaks to a kind of a strange connection between ourselves and each other and the cosmos itself. I mean, if it's the case that we are connected in some way, as before death and after death, as a lot of these accounts suggest, and we agree ahead of time to have these important meetings in this life, etc., etc. I mean, what a strange, mysterious thing that would be. What
Yeah.
does that tell us about? What does that tell us about our lives? Certainly it would feel extremely telling and important as to the nature of things, and maybe give us ideas as to why we're here, and maybe a greater sense of meaning and purpose and importance. I mean, after all, if we agreed ahead of time to meet up in a lifetime, it suggests that there is great meaning to this lifetime, now and beyond this lifetime. So that's, yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was rambling anyway.
I was just gonna say, like, I think every single person has their own hero's journey. You know what I mean? Like, they talk about in, like, history, or and I think everybody has their own mission, and I feel like everybody's mission is important, and everybody's hero's journey is important for whatever their life is trying to play out. And maybe this is like like they say in the movie, these are like the sands of time, like like that, like we access them, like, and like we I don't know, it's fascinating.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Like, I believe the same myself. Like, I do believe that life is infused with meaning. It's everywhere you look. Okay, it's very easy to be brought to ignore that, especially in the kind of fast-paced world we live in today, the kind of nihilism we see around us, the kind of endless bad news, etc. But when I look into the world, whether it's the natural world, whether it's our inner worlds, whether it's the connections between each other and these types of experiences, I see meaning everywhere. I see purpose everywhere. So it's not surprising to me personally that these kinds of accounts would also be filled with such things, and that people would take and come to such conclusions from these things also. So yeah, I do believe that life is inherently infused with meaning and purpose, and I can't necessarily say to somebody, that's the case, therefore live that way, but that's just a feeling that I've come to throughout my life for various reasons.
I'll read a comment from Trey from the audience. This is it's kind of like a Gnostic way to look at it, but he says, if these couples are really happy, is this a way Christ Sophia overrides the hell realm? If people believe we're in a hell realm, like, would that be like an immaculate way to, I don't know, like break out of the matrix through love, if that makes any sense? You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, the way I would approach that question, I'm not sure about the exact meaning of that, the hell realm, etc. But the way I would answer it is that, why do some people have these experiences and others don't? That's something that comes up with a lot of these kind of areas in these paranormal realms. Like, well, why did this person, have a crisis apparition or near-death experience and this person didn't? The way I look at it is, why not? Perhaps it was important in that individual's life that they had this type of experience, but it's less important in the life of another. So maybe that will speak to the listener's question, because, perhaps that type of thing in relation to love was needed in that person's life, and they did need to interpret it in a certain way, etc., etc. But others don't. Maybe others are more capable of navigating certain situations in life without the intervention of experiences of this kind. Maybe even we could go a bit further and suggest the possibility that some people perhaps they chose a certain form of suffering themselves before they came here, as kind of unfortunate as that might sound to say. Like, it may be the case that the individual, like, if it's the case that we do have some hand in our lives before we come here, then it wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that we would accept a certain amount of suffering before we come here. So if you kind of can put your life into that context, and some people have, then it is a kind of a way of framing your suffering and pain in a more beneficial way, I believe. But that's obviously for each individual to decide for themselves. So I hope that in some way that spoke to the listener's question.
Daniel, I just realized this. Holy shit! Like, I don't know why. It's because I do so many shows. You have to excuse me.
I've been here before, yeah.
You were on my show before. You were on for episode 1648. It's still on Spreaker. See, because what happened, Daniel, was they took down my first YouTube because of censorship and stuff like that. And I've done like over 2,400 shows. So like, but wow. I just looked up because I got like a deja vu moment, but it was actually. It wasn't like it was like you were on my show before it. You were on for episode 1648 where we covered apparitions at the moment of death. I thought so.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm a very forgettable person. It's not your fault.
I do so many shows. But let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about apparitions at the moment of death, and let's also talk about telepathic tales. Like, tell the audience a little bit about those and like what they can take away from those and those books.
Absolutely. Like, my first book was Apparitions at the Moment of Death, and that was a book where I really wanted to write about the crisis apparition. These are, again, as I mentioned earlier, but just in case anyone tuned in late or whatever, the crisis apparition is the experience in which you, and this is just a typical type of example, perhaps you're sitting in your bedroom, you see your mother walking in, for example. She may wave at you. Maybe she's actually glowing a little bit, but most times they look pretty normal. Maybe they have a bag in their hand, a luggage bag suggesting a journey, for example. And you later discover, maybe you get the phone call just moments after the experience, that person you saw had died at that moment. This is an incredibly fascinating experience that's still very common and almost impossible to explain conventionally, because the individual had no expectation of death in most of these cases. They had no reason to suspect the individual was dying at that time, and yet they had this experience in which they learned that information. And I wanted to present hundreds. I want to present these accounts as they occurred through history and through time in large numbers. There are many hundreds of accounts in that book. And in Telepathic Tales, I expanded that into many different types of psychical experiences, experiences of ESP. And I kind of took the same cross-cultural and historical route there. So I just wanted to present many accounts in front of the reader so that they could understand how common these things have been through time, and just so they could have them all in one place and be able to pretty much just open the book on any page and find one. And for me, again, my work deals with veridical experiences. Again, experiences in which the inner world correlates with the outer, and those are the kinds of accounts the reader will find in my work.
Yeah. And about Telepathic Tales, how did you get the stories for this book? And were they submitted to you? Like, and did you have to do a lot of research for?
Yeah, it was a ridiculous amount of research for that book. There are probably, if I could estimate, maybe there's 600 accounts in the book.
Wow.
Yeah, and there are many hundreds in the first book also, and then this one. And yes, it just took basically a large amount of researching, trawling through libraries, archives, document collections, anthropology collections, historical books, saints' lives, something I looked in very deeply into the biographies of the saints, for example. So it's just, it became kind of a addiction to finding these accounts from various sources for the sake of of having them all in one place, and for the readers also.
Yeah, I mean, we had a great comment from the audience. My friend Jay Skyrunner's in the audience. He has a channel too, and he says, "Great guest. I'd like to have him on mine, as he's into dreams as well. So I'll connect you guys.
Awesome.
And then let me see here. So what did you have an opinion on the telepathy tapes? Like, that was where supposedly the autistic kids have a like a telepathic network. Are you privy to this?
Yeah, I'm aware of the telepathy tapes. I will say that my research has taken up so much time that I haven't had a huge amount of time to go deep into the telepathy tapes. But I do know that there is a lot of really interesting work being done there. But there is also a lot of very interesting kind of pushback also, even from within the parapsychological community, if you will. Like there are some back and forths going on at the moment as to the veracity of the work. But at the same time, the kinds of experiences that are being reported are those that are still kind of reported among people kind of spontaneously, as opposed to in these large numbers in a specific group of children. So unfortunately I can't speak too deeply to that, but in my work I'm less interested in proving to the reader that these things are occurring so much as to present them with a large amount of information with which I want them to do with what they will.
Yeah. Yeah, and about the deathbed apparitions, I'd love to get into that real quick before we go. Like, it sounds fascinating. So, people, I guess what's happening is like it's not just like a shared death experience, but people are having apparitions of their loved ones before they pass, or is it the relatives of the person? I guess it would be because someone would have to live to tell the story, right?
Absolutely, it's the relatives, yeah, and like there are many different types of these accounts. Like for example, like again, I kind of went into more obscure sources for these in the book Apparitions at the Moment of Death. Like for example, revolutionary Italian general Giuseppe Garibaldi. I think a lot of people have heard that name, but they may not know that in 1852, his friend and secretary noted that Garibaldi had an incredible dream that had a quote unquote extraordinary effect on him. And he dreamed while he was at sea that he was visited by a strange dream of the woman of Nice bearing his mother to the grave, which, as he declares, came to him on the very day which she died far off on the other side of the waters. And then we could go straight to a kind of a more modern account in which Patricia Pearson, author, Canadian, a lot of incredible work, related a case of a woman whose dream of a funeral appeared to have a prophetic element. Her deceased mother was lying in a casket. I was shocked, said the informant, that she was in a casket when she seemed to be so alive. The woman was then right after this dream, she was awakened by a phone call conveying the news that this person had been shot to death. The funeral, held a few days later, mirrored the unusual details in her dream. Okay, so like if you read one or two of these accounts, they're kind of a curiosity. But for me, like I find these to be the most interesting form of veridical extrasensory experience reported, because they're consistent, they're powerful, they're simplistic, they're not embellished. People don't necessarily like speaking about them. They're not being put out there so that people make a reputation, but they are incredibly fascinating and consistent. And yeah, I would absolutely assume that a lot of your own listeners have probably had an experience of this kind, because that's what I've found in many walks of life.
Yeah, wow, this is fascinating. Well, yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great to see you again, and yeah, like I knew that I thought about that. Like it was weird. Like I had a vision that, or I had a memory that we did this before, and like I was absolutely right. That's great. So yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
tell the people like how they can get the book. And here, I'll hold it up again, and here's a copy of the book, guys, and it's an amazing book. I think you guys will all like it. I think you guys can all get it. Is this at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and everywhere?
Yeah, yeah, you can get the book on Amazon, pretty much all good bookstores. And if anyone's interested, they can find me on X at near_death_fe. And yeah, appreciate you having me on the show again. And it's very fitting that it would include a deja vu. So
Yeah,
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 it's kind of
right.
worked out. Thankfully,
Well, thank you
yeah.
so much, Daniel. All right,
Thank you
take
very
care,
much,
guys.
Rob.
See
I
you guys
appreciate the
later
time.
on tonight. I'll be live again tonight. Thanks, guys.